African Real Estate TV. We learn, educate, and participate in the real estate economy.
As a reporter, because I'm a reporter, but as reporters, if I do make my story when it is based on the common people, those stories are not so much regarded by the editors. They tend to underlook them. So they run for the politics stories, those stories from the politicians, those people who are well known. So you find that for you keep on making stories from common people and from maybe the grassroots, those people who are voiceless, the voiceless ones. But your stories are underlooked by the editors. So I don't know how best can we be helped as reporters, because the more your stories are not taken as something that is essential, the more you also lose some energy in the reporting. So how can we be best helped?
Yeah, and I know that. I know the frustration can be there. I myself have done some of the stories I started doing for newspapers were actually stories that didn't look like they were big, but they kind of captured or the interest of people, and sometimes it was a profile of a unique person, and they may not look like big headline grabbing stories, but they're great human interest stories. And indeed, to me, the human interest stories are the most impactful stories than the political stories. But unfortunately, the big media houses are always looking for the headline grabbing political stories. I remember one of the stories I ever did, wrote for a newspaper, was of a guy who had no hands and no legs, and he was an amazing artist. And that story of that guy was published in a Kenyan newspaper called the Standard, East African Standard, and so many people loved it. But here's what I can say. Again, I'll go back to the point of exploring, find out what are the organization. Now, it depends on who you work for. I don't know how free you are to kind of explore and look for places where you could actually contribute some of the human interest stories when perhaps the person you write to or you do journalistic work for does not want to take your story. So, for example, I don't know, are you a full-time employee of a particular media house, or are you a freelancer, as they call them? Daudi?
Yeah, I'm just a freelancer.
Okay, so if you're a freelancer, in fact, you're in a very good place. Do you do radio or television?
I do radio.
Okay, you do radio, for example. Well, there are now organizations that media kind of platforms where you can share pitches for stories that are of great human interest, and somebody's going to get them and pay you for them. I can give you that if you like to write down. There's somewhere called paydesk.co.ke. I think it is a place where you can sign up. I hire many reporters for TV, but also even some for radio to do amazing human interest stories. And when they do these stories, you get paid directly, and some their fellows who give stories as so many times. I mentioned it here one time that we have the opportunities. The opportunities are there for some of you to actually sell their stories out there. So what I can say is that for a person like you who is not too much into politics and you want to really do human interest stories that sometimes get ignored by the editors, you also, you want to explore other opportunities where people may have an interest in your stories, but make them unique. Because sometimes when people talk about human interest stories, sometimes it's because we are stuck on certain very kind of simplistic stories that people feel like there's nothing that resonates with somebody in another place outside of your town, for example. If you give me a pitch for a story here at the Voice of America, I'll ask you, okay, you're in Uganda, you're giving me this story. How would the person in Botswana find this relevant to them? How will the person in Mozambique or even in Tunisia. So it's a question of figuring out what are some of those stories that are, essentially very, very powerful in the way they are told and also in the subjects they address, that will be compelling. Then it's not easy for somebody to ignore. So think of more creative ways of writing stories. Think of some more stories that are relatable to more people. And then if you find that you're so squeezed, explore and find out from colleagues, from some of us, where else could I take my stories? Because that's the only way. We may not be able to force your editors to take your human interest stories and make them headline news, but there is a place for this. And people get paid for writing great human interest stories, but they have to be done creatively, and they have to be stories that other people from other places can relate to. And I can tell you there's many stories we've done from Uganda, for example, most of the time human interest stories. Rarely do we have political stories, because you know how sensitive things are, for example, in Uganda. In many of the stories we get, even for television, are human interest stories, and they're really good. And I can give you examples. Yeah.
African Real Estate TV will learn, educate, and participate in the real estate economy.